Dumak dumak dum dum. Dumak dumak dum dum. The rhythmic sounds of the dholak filled the air in the little village of Pausalya as the golden yellow light from the glass lanterns danced across a little wooden stage. Chamak chum chum, chamak chum chum. A ghungroo started tinkling playfully. Chumri, in her finest green and gold lehenga, threw her hands into the air and twirled around the stage in a mesmerizing dance. The audience clapped enthusiastically. Suddenly, a slight movement off the stage caught her eye. Veer was standing in the wings, waiting to perform next. Chumri bowed graciously and walked off the stage. Veer stood up straight and marched onto the stage. Approaching him was Kalia, a figure in a black mask. Dum chak dum chak dum. Dum chak dum. The dholak belted out a suspenseful beat. Veer and Kalia came face to face with each other. Veer drew out his sword and charged towards Kalia. Kalia too pulled out a sword and sliced the air inches away from Veer. Their swords clashed as they fought bravely. Veer emerged victorious. The masked figure lay slumped in the corner, raising his hands in surrender. The curtain fell and the audience erupted in a thunderous applause. Bhairon and Bhanu came out from behind the curtain and bowed to the audience. In their hands, suspended by black strings, were Chumri, Veer and Kalia. Bhairon and Bhanu pulled the strings and the puppets waved at the audience, their wooden faces sporting big painted smiles. Later that night, as Bhanu tossed a hot roasted chapati onto Bhairon's plate, she brought up a subject that had been bothering both of them for a long time now. "We need to make some new puppets, Bhairon," she said. "The ones we have now are all old and tattered." Bhairon nodded with a heavy heart. He could not bear to part with his puppets. He had been working with them for years. Their bodies have been stitched and glued together in so many places. They can come apart any time. New puppets will breathe fresh life into the performances, said Bhanu. As Bhanu sat down beside him with a vessel full of steaming yellow dal, Bhairon sadly recalled how Veer's arm broke in the sword fight that day. A decision had to be made. "Okay, we'll start work on the new puppets tomorrow," he said as he got ready to go to bed. The clock struck midnight. The sounds of blissful sleep could be heard in the house. Suddenly, there was a shuffling on the charpai in the corner of the room. The wall behind the charpai came to life as the shadows of little people were projected onto it by the silvery light of the moon. "My poor arm," groaned Veer. His hand hung limply by his side. Unable to balance himself with one hand, Veer tripped over a sleeping horse puppet and fell flat on his face. The horse awoke with a start. "Phew!" exhaled Dagdu. "You know, I was in the midst of a frightful nightmare in which my stomach had split open. I'm so glad I woke up. The other puppets stared at Dagdu blankly. Dagdu, your stomach is split open, said Veer. Don't you remember? Bhairo opened you up to stuff you with some more cotton because you were getting too thin. That's why you couldn't perform today. Oh, right, exclaimed Dagdu. That would explain why my stomach feels empty. And I thought I was hungry. Silly me. Just then, they heard some muffled sobs. Sitting under the charpai, her face buried in her hands, was Jhumri. Veer and Kalia jumped off the charpai and rushed to her side. What is it, Jhumri? Asked Veer. You know my heart breaks to see you shed even a single tear. Bhairo and Bhanu were talking about making new puppets. They feel we're getting too old and need to be replaced, said Jhumri, her eyes brimming with tears. Veer and Kalia stared at each other in horror. What? Replace us? But we are perfectly fine. We don't need any replacing, said Kalia. They don't want us anymore, said Jhumri, sobbing again.
Jhumri, oh Jhumri, she sheds a tear. Her heart, her mind is filled with fear. Our endless glories, dances and stories are forever ties the world denies. Jhumri, oh Jhumri, our songs are but empty sighs.
Veer and Kalia tried to console Jhumri, but they too knew that this was terrible news. The next morning, Bhairo and Bhanu got to work on the new puppets. They cut and sewed all day long, singing songs and practicing moves. Bhanu, I think we're going to be a hit with the audiences, exclaimed Bhairo, admiring the brand new puppets in front of them. In a corner of the room, Jhumri, Veer, Kalia and Dagdu lay still. Their faces were emotionless, but their hearts were beating with the impending fear of being replaced. When night fell again, Jhumri, Veer, Kalia and Dagdu sprang to life. They jumped off the charpoy and tiptoed into the adjoining room. They're in there, whispered Veer, pointing to a small wooden case sitting atop a table. The puppets climbed up the table, opened the case and peered inside. There was a grand-looking puppet in an orange dhoti, a beautiful female puppet in a pink chiffon lehenga, a fierce villain puppet in a silver mask, and a mighty horse puppet with a mane of silky brown hair. They really did look striking. Dagdu was sniffing at the horse puppet's mane. The puppet didn't respond. After all, puppets without strings cannot come to life. Dagdu gave it a little tug in irritation. To his surprise, a bunch of its hair came off in his hands. "Oops!" whispered Dagdu, hoping no one saw him. "Hey, that's a good idea, Dagdu. Let's have some fun with the newcomers," said Kalia mischievously. He went up to the silver-masked puppet and turned its feet the other way around. "Now he won't know if he's coming or going," snickered Kalia. Not to be outdone, Veer bent the elbows of the puppet in the orange dhoti, so that its arms now stuck out in odd positions. Meanwhile, Jhumri was busy entangling the other puppet's lehenga around its legs. "Let's see how she dances now," said Jhumri. Then she took the end of the puppet's plait and with the help of some glue, stuck it on her face like a moustache. Tears of laughter were now pouring down Jhumri's face. Dagdu too was rolling on the floor, laughing, his hooves in the air. The puppets stepped back to admire their handiwork. Kalia chuckled, placing the puppets back in the wooden case and closing the lid. The next morning, Bhairon and Bhanu awoke excited. It was the day their new puppets would perform. Bhairon picked up his musical instruments and rushed out of the house to set up the stage. Bhanu grabbed the case with the puppets inside and followed Bhairon. The stage was set. Bhairon had instructed his assistants to place the puppets in position, while he and Bhanu practiced their song for the evening. Of course, as the assistants hurriedly strung up the puppets, they did not notice the mischievous handiwork of Dagdu, Kalia, Veer and Jhumri. The crowd was gathering in anticipation. It was time. A harmonium was playing melodiously in the background. Bhanu started singing, her voice smooth like honey, while Bhairon took his place backstage, puppet strings in hand.
Come to the land of the golden sand, of Rajas, Ranis, Rajputs grand.
Welcome to the land of the golden sand, of Rajas, Ranis, Rajputs grand.
Oh, come to hear us spin a yarn from the glorious land of Rajasthan.
Temple bells ring in glory, the puppets tell a magical story of love, longing, battles won, adventures under the Mayport sun.
The land of forts, palaces and kings, the land where colorful gypsies sing, the land of rhythm, land of romance, land of music, song and dance. Music, song and dance, music, song and dance, music, song and dance.
But on stage was a strange sight indeed. The puppet in the pink lehenga was wobbling unsteadily. After every 2 steps, she would suddenly fall flat on her face. Then she would get back up again, smiling at the audience through her mustache. The audience started booing. Bhero, there's something wrong with the puppet, said Bhanu urgently. But Bhero had already brought the other puppets on stage. The horse puppet entered. Its mane was all uneven and shaggy. Bits of it kept falling off as it moved. As he galloped, he left a trail of hair behind him. The audience booed again. Then, the puppet in the orange dhoti jumped on top of the horse, but could not keep his balance as his hands were pointing up in the air in different directions. Finally, the puppet in the silver mask came running. But because his feet were facing backwards, he looked utterly confused. And so did Bhero and Bhanu, who were watching the audience standing up to leave. Still wondering what had happened, Bhero and Bhanu pulled the strings off the new puppets. Finally, Bhero spoke. I knew we should have continued with the old puppets. They have always been lucky for us. Bhanu nodded in agreement, looking at the odd puppets lying on the stage. From that day on, Bhero and Bhanu decided that they would never replace the old puppets again. Instead, they repaired the puppets and gave them a brand new look. Dagdu's stomach was mended, and Veer's arm was fixed. Jhumri got a beautiful new lehenga, and Kalia's mask was properly stitched. They looked as good as new. Veer, Jhumri, Kalia and Dagdu were overjoyed. Their little adventure that night remained a secret forever.
To the land of the golden sand, of Rajas, Ranis, Rajputs grand.
Welcome to the land of the golden sand, of Rajas, Ranis, Rajputs grand.
Oh, come to hear us spin a yarn from the glorious land of Rajasthan.
Bells ring in glory, the puppets tell a magical story of love, longing, battles won, adventures under the Mayport sun.
The land of forts, lands and kings, the land where colorful gypsies sing. The land of rhythm, land of romance, land of music, song and dance. Music, song and dance, music, song and dance, music, song and dance.
Deep in the Sahyadri mountains, there was a village called Barbarpur. The village was in the middle of a green forest where there grew the most delicious fruits and vegetables. So the people were prosperous and happy and had nothing much to do most of the time. So they talked and gossiped and told tall tales. Some of the tales they told were so tall that if you put them one on top of the other, they would reach the stars. In the same village, there was an ill-tempered man called Pandurang. He was so grumpy that no one in the village had ever seen him smile. He was so dour that people said that milk turned into curd when he looked at it. He scowled at stories and snorted at jokes. So people stayed away from him. No one ever went anywhere near his house, and he was quite satisfied with this state of affairs. Pandurang often went down to the town in the plains to sell the fruits that grew in his backyard. One day, as he was coming back from the town, he had a sudden coughing fit. He coughed and coughed. Something seemed to be stuck in his throat. So he coughed and coughed again and spat out a feather. Imagine his surprise. He frowned at the feather. He scowled at the sky. How could a feather that belonged to a bird have come into his throat? He could not understand it at all. After a while, he set off again towards the village. But every few minutes, he stopped, looked at the sky, shook his head, and cleared his throat. By the time he reached home, his head was aching, his throat was sore, and a deep furrow had settled between his eyebrows. "What's the matter? Why do you look like you've swallowed a lemon?" asked his wife, Gangubai. "Gangu," whispered Pandurang hoarsely, "the strangest thing happened today." "What?" asked Gangubai. "I was coming from the town. It was warm and beautiful weather, when suddenly I coughed and out came a white downy feather." "A feather? How's that?" asked Gangu. "I don't know," whispered Pandurang. "But don't tell anyone." "Of course," said Gangubai. And as soon as Pandurang had eaten his lunch and gone to take a nap, she slipped off to see her neighbor and best friend, Sakubai. "Saku," she whispered through the gate. "Come here. I have to tell you something. The strangest thing happened today." "What?" asked Sakubai. "It's the strangest thing I've heard. My husband coughed a bird. When he tried to talk, it flew out like a word. When he tried to sing, it flapped out like a song. A bird out of his mouth? I think something is wrong." "A bird? How's that?" asked Sakubai. "I don't know," said Gangubai, "but don't tell anyone." "Of course," said Sakubai. And as soon as Gangubai had left, she went to visit her mother-in-law on the other side of the village. Sasubai! She called out to her mother-in-law. Do you know, the strangest thing happened today? What? Asked her mother-in-law. My friend Gangu, who lives over there, told me something that made me stare. She said her husband had gone out of town, and when he came back, guess what she found? What? Asked Sasubai, her head ready to burst with curiosity. A flock of white birds were flying right out of her husband Pandurang's wide open mouth. A flock of birds? How's that? I don't know, but don't tell anyone. Of course, said her mother-in-law. And as soon as Sakubai had left, she went to her brother, who was lying under a guava tree and dreaming of mangoes. Babia! She shouted to her brother. Do you know? The strangest thing happened today. What? Asked Babia grumpily. He had just been about to eat the mango in his dream. A tree grew inside Pandu's mouth. It grew and grew and grew and grew. And on that tree there came to nest a flock of birds, full 62. And when Pandu opened his mouth, they flew and flew and flew and flew. I barely can believe the tale, but Saku saw it, so it's true. A tree with nests full of birds? How's that? I don't know, but don't tell anyone. Of course, said Babia. And as soon as his sister had left, he went to the tea shop where Ramu and Lakhya were drinking a cup of strong masala chai. Ay, Ramya, Lakhya, he grunted. Do you know? The strangest thing happened today. What? Asked Ramu and Lakhya, bored. Nothing ever happened in Barbarpur. You know old Pandu, that one, the grumpy chap, Ganya Bhau's son. He swallowed a forest in town. I'm telling the truth, don't frown. Saku, my niece-in-law, told Kai, my sister, she saw the forest of trees in his jaw, with birds going chirrup and caw. When he opened his mouth to say hi, all the birds started to fly. A whole forest? How's that? I don't know, but don't tell anyone. Very soon, it was all around the village that there was a forest growing in Pandurang's mouth. And it was full of tigers, monkeys, wolves, bears, and elephants. And that when Pandurang opened his mouth and talked, out flew parrots and mynas, peacocks, koels, hoopoes, woodpeckers, kingfishers. The list grew longer and longer. Naturally, people began to head for Pandurang's house to see this wonderful sight. They forgot all about his grumpiness and his bad temper in their eagerness to see the things growing and birds flying out of his mouth. Pandurang, meanwhile, tired with the effort of having spat a feather, was fast asleep. His mouth was open, a horrible snoring came from deep within his nose, and his stomach heaved up and down as if keeping time to the snores. Suddenly, his sleep was disturbed by the sound of voices. Pandurang disliked human voices. Scowling and muttering, he got up and went to the door. His wife Gangu was standing there, talking to what looked like the whole village. In fact, it was the whole village, except for one deaf old man who hadn't heard the rumor and was sitting at home calling for his supper. When Pandu appeared at the door, a gasp passed through the crowd. There was a sudden silence as they all stared at him, waiting for him to say something so that they could see the flocks of birds flying out of his mouth. Pandu opened his mouth, a loud sigh of expectation from the crowd, and he yawned. A murmur of disappointment. Suddenly, someone in the crowd shouted, "Aye, Pandu, say something." Pandu scowled harder. The furrow on his forehead grew so deep that if you filled it with water, you could sail a ship in it. "Go away," he said. And of course, nothing came out of his mouth. Everyone started talking at the same time. Where's the forest? Where are the tigers? Where's the flock? Where's the bird? Where's the feather? Where's the... "Stop!" shouted Pandu. "Will someone tell me what's going on?"
That in your mouth were beasts of every kind. Yes, we thought we'd find beasts of every kind.
Beasts of every kind, beasts of every kind.
We heard that there were leopards, tigers, wolves and bears. We thought we'd see them there, tigers, wolves and bears.
We also heard that there was a flock of flying birds. We also heard that there was a flock of flying birds.
A flock of flying birds, a flock of flying birds.
Yes, this is what we heard, that there's a flock of birds. We heard that when you speak, the birds are fly right out.
Yes, out of your mouth, we heard that birds fly out.
Well, at least we thought that we would see one bird. Yes, with every bird, we thought you'd fit a bird. If not a whole big bird, we thought we'd see a feather.
It's not a whole big bird, we thought we'd see a feather.
We are waiting for it, brother. Let's see you spit a feather.
We heard that in your mouth were beasts of every kind. Yes, we thought we'd find beasts of every kind.
Pandu listened to them with a deep frown on his face. But with each outrageous line, his frown got lighter and lighter. And by the time they had got to the feather, a big smile broke out on his face. This was such a rare sight that the crowd went silent with awe. And in that silence fell the rarest sound that Barbarpur had ever heard. Pandu laughed. He laughed and laughed till he was rolling around on the ground. Soon the whole village was shrieking and roaring and gasping with laughter. And even today, everyone in Barbarpur talks about the day that Pandu spat a feather and laughed till he cried. Everyone except one deaf old man who went to sleep without his supper.
That in your mouth were beasts of every kind. Yes, we thought we'd find beasts of every kind.
Beasts of every kind, beasts of every kind.
We heard that there were leopards, tigers, wolves and bears. We thought we'd see them there, tigers, wolves and bears.
We also heard that there was a flock of flying birds. We also heard that there was a flock of flying birds.
A flock of flying birds, a flock of flying birds. Yes, this is what we heard, that there's a flock of birds. We heard that when you speak, the birds will fly right out.
Yes, out of your mouth, we heard that birds fly out.
Well, at least we thought that we would see one bird. Yes, with every word, we thought you'd fit a bird. If not a whole big bird, we thought we'd see a feather.
It's not a whole big bird, we thought we'd see a feather.
We are waiting for it, brother. Let's see you spit a feather.
We heard that in your mouth were beasts of every kind. Yes, we thought we'd find beasts of every kind.